Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. Matthew Dickerson. Tech Talk. Sit back and relax. It's time to talk technology.
Hello, rock stars. Welcome to Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson, the podcast that'll make you smarter in just 45 minutes, and that's a guarantee. Smartening you up today includes learning all about how VR goggles are becoming more emotionally intelligent and sensitive to your needs. And we have a couple of stories where real-life tech has taken inspiration from the Star Wars universe. Stay tuned for space droids and holograms, folks. And also from the world of robotics comes the news of new energy-efficient ways of getting moving. But more on that later. In the meantime, please welcome to the microphone the bloke with all the knowing. It's Matthew Dickerson. How are you, Matt?
Well, you do sound a bit like a politician when you're making wild promises about making people smarter in 45 minutes with no way of really checking whether that's occurred.
Sorry, I meant to say we'll make you greater.
Greater?
In 45 minutes.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay.
Or make you great again.
At least make you 45 minutes into the future in 45 minutes of listening to the podcast.
Yes.
Well, it's interesting that you go on the politician promise line because I do want to talk about elections across the state of New South Wales. There have been local government elections, and I still find it clumsy, cumbersome, backward maybe, that you walk into a polling booth and there's a piece of paper and they put a little signature in the top corner. There you go. That'll do. That's a check. And you go and vote. And then the process of counting those votes is pretty clumsy. They'll go through, they'll count all the number one votes. You'll get a bit of an idea. And then they go and type all those votes into a computer system and then say, run the preferential system. And then it does that in a few milliseconds, but it obviously took a long time to enter all that data. So that's 128 local government areas across the entire state. That's a lot of data entry. Now, surely we could cut a step there. Surely just let the people voting do the data entry themselves. Have a screen. If you're worried about someone hacking into a system, if you're worried about something where, oh no, we'll have something where people hack in, remotely access it and put all these votes in, we'll still do the same concept with a voting booth, a polling booth, but just have electronic machines there. And I thought surely that could be hacked into as well. But if you walked in, typed in your numbers, put your numbers wherever you want them to and said submit, and then it spits out a piece of paper that goes into a voting box. So there's still a piece of paper. You look at that, yep, that's what I did. Put it into the voting box. You let it all run electronically, and then the answer is known at 6:01 that night. And if someone goes, hold on, that just sounds like rubbish. Sure, if you want to pay to have all those bits of paper pulled out and counted manually, or maybe just pull out a sample just to give 10% sampling to get an indication whether it looks like it's right, whatever, but you've got a backup there of pieces of paper to match that. But the thing I love about that is that typically you see 5-6% across the state informal votes. Now, some of those are protest votes. Some of those where they write down Darth Vader could do a better job and they tick Darth Vader, that'll show them. Mind you, the candidates can never actually see the voting papers, so don't worry about that. Yeah. So there might be some that are like that, but I think most of those informal votes are when someone goes in and they go, I'll vote this way, and they don't count to the right number, or they put 2 number 3s or whatever, some mistake they made. So if you had electronic, it would say, you ready to submit? Oh, hold on, this is not a valid vote. Oh, whoops, I put 2 number 3s. I'll fix it up and put the right numbers there. So you could make sure it was right. Or you could actually have a button that says, do you want to make a protest? Informal vote. That's the one for me.
Boom.
Angrily hit that. Maybe make it so you've got to hit it 3 times so it really makes the point. Dang, dang, dang. That'll show them. And they register an informal vote. But everyone else, because most people genuinely want to vote, so let them vote. So I don't know what's wrong with that system. I know last time in New South Wales they had a concept called iVote. And I thought it was fantastic. I had to vote in an electorate that was outside where I was at the time. I went online, I went tick, 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 voted, and I did make sure that my vote was correct before I submitted it. Submit the vote. It was so much quicker than lining up at a polling booth. I didn't have to go through all the running of the gauntlet to get all the bits of paper shoved in my face. And I just think that made sense. Now, they didn't run iVote this time because last time there was a stuff up. There was some mistake with iVote and they had to redo a couple of council elections based on some iVote results that weren't accurate.
Oh, right.
So obviously it was an error. So their solution was not to fix the error. Their solution was to say, we're not doing that.
Just to wipe it.
Wipe it.
Oh.
So we seem to have not gone very far forward in our voting technology. Sure, I do remember, and this is really a simplistic system. I'm just trying to think, maybe it was 20, 25 years ago. When they did the vote count, it was done manually. They'd have all the votes there. And then when they did the preferences, it was literally a random distribution of preferences. So you might have a pile of votes. Okay, this candidate has got so many overflow preferences, and so we need to take 100 preferences from that flow. And they would pick out 100 random sheets of paper to do the preferences. Now that means if you ask for a recount, you would definitely get a different result, because the other 100 random ones you take out would be different to the first 100 you took out. Whereas now they put them on a computer and the preferences flow exactly as the numbering system is. But it just seems to make so much more sense. I get it when people are scared of it, people voting from home, but still to go into a polling booth, but just have something electronic there for them to be able to use.
Well, you've got to go to the polling booth because you need your democracy sausage.
That's true. That's part of it. And you need to read those 77 call flutes, and you need to have all those people putting pieces of paper in your face. Do they make any difference? I don't know. It keeps happening, so they must make a difference.
I collect them all simply just to make people happy.
Yeah, that's a lot of people who do
I'm a people
that.
pleaser. And then I walk in and just make the vote that I was going to make to start off with.
Yeah, that's right. So how many people were influenced by it? I'd love to see some testing where they put a candidate up and they had a polling booth that was full of call flutes and people and all the rest of it, and they had another polling booth that was in a similar demographic that had nothing of that, and to see if there was much difference in the actual vote. I mean, you'd have to do that a few times over a few different areas, but yeah, I'd love to see someone do that research. But at the moment, they all do it, so they better keep doing it. It's one of those things.
Maybe one day. Maybe one day.
Yeah. Anyway, electronic voting, please. Surely we can do that.
Okay, people, let's get started with a little bit of crime fighting today. Who needs Sherlock Holmes when there are smart speakers here, there and everywhere these days? In domestic crimes, stitching together evidence can be tricky at the best of times. So a little sticky beak sitting on the kitchen bench has got to be some sort of help. Now, Matt, you insist that these things aren't listening into absolutely everything. So why are police so keen to access their data?
I can't remember saying that, James.
We did a couple of tests, didn't we?
We did.
And yours test failed, but our test worked.
That's right.
So out of 2 tests, we got a 50-50 result.
A high sample space, high number of samples there. But it's interesting because I saw an old crime show the other day, and it had people doing things like asking people door to door if they remember seeing something, going through a very old-fashioned crime investigation process. They had pieces of paper they'd write down notes on, then some of the police would compare some of these notes. And I thought, imagine a modern crime show compared to this. It's just cameras, DNA, fingerprints, and
It's over before the first ad break.
that's right. Every crime should be solved these days because we've got so much evidence there. And here's another bit of that evidence. Now, some criminologists say that even though crime shows demonstrate that all these crimes are solved very quickly by all this electronic evidence, he said, well, not so much. There is still good old-fashioned police work involved, but it's got to make it easier when you've got some of this extra evidence along the way. So the problem here is that the Amazon Echo Show records audio, images and internet searches while it's being used. So, yes, it is listening to you, but only when you say, listen to me. But maybe it's also listening because guess what? It's got to listen to hear you say activate. So I'm trying to avoid saying any of the key terms.
Switching off everyone. But my question is, if this is the case, then whenever a crime's going to be committed, the criminal just needs to make sure that they don't say, okay,
That's right.
Google, or hello, Google.
Depending on what the device might be. But it was interesting in this one, there was a murder that occurred and there was an Amazon Echo Show in the vicinity, and the police thought, maybe we could use that. So they went to Amazon and said, could you please give us access to any information that was on there, any logs, any searches, any information at all, any recorded audio? And Amazon, the same as we've heard from Apple before, we don't really care that you're researching a crime, a murder. Our privacy, the privacy of our customers is too important, so no. So they gave it to some specialists to say, what can you get out of this that might be of some use? And what they got was a bit scary. They got lots of stuff. They had voice requests. They had access to any imagery that might have been captured by it because there is obviously a camera on board. They had access to information that was in the cloud that was accessed from this particular device. So more information than you'd think. And a lot of it is in the logs of the device just to see what was happening there, what requests were made, that type of thing. but it was actually useful in gathering that information. Now, we've talked about it before with technology, that you don't necessarily rely on that data, but if you look at that information, you go, it sounds like James's voice and it looks like James's image. Now let's go and research a bit further and see if James is in the vicinity and does he have a good alibi. So it might not give you the final solution to the crime, but it gives you a pretty good bit of hint as to who might have been in the room when the crime was committed, and then you can go and research it further and then find out that James has got blood on his hands, so or whatever it might be. Not saying that James is involved in a crime here.
It may have been that I was just preparing dinner.
That's right. So it's a bit scary, and I think it's one of these situations where it's a cat and mouse game. You've got a process of legislation that's trying to keep up with technology, and manufacturers are going as fast as they can to introduce new features, new technology, and they're not really worried about the legislation. They're not trying to do anything illegal, but a lot of this isn't illegal. It's just not up to date in terms of legislation yet. So will there be some legislation that says these devices have to give information out to a police force, for example? What do you need? Do you need a warrant or something of that description to be able to go and look at this information? Should Amazon be forced to give it up? But at the moment, they found that you don't really need Amazon. You need some experts and they can pull the data off it anyway. So if you're a murderer out there, if you're a burglar, then you need to go in, you need to shut down the cameras in the house because there's probably cameras in there, find where they've been recorded, shut that down, hack into the account of where it's all stored online, so then delete that information from there, get rid of any smart speakers, smart devices in the room, get rid of those. Once you do all that, then you can go and commit your crime as long as the police aren't already there.
Well, they always say every criminal makes 10 mistakes. So now that 10 mistakes is going to be all those little, I forgot to switch off the Google or the Siri or the Alexa or whatever.
That's right.
And I forgot to go through that whole list that you just brought up just then. That was my mistake.
Yeah, one mistake I made, and that wasn't switching off every electronic
Next
device.
Time I'm going to murder someone, I've got to switch off all those devices.
Right. So it's quite fascinating where we're going, but good luck to the crims as we keep going forward, I say.
Now, we all know that exercise is hard work, and sometimes in moments of weakness, you just need a little extra motivation to get you off the couch and up and at 'em. Perhaps that's when VR goggles comes into their own. In the world of VR, folks, anything can become reality, so exercise has got to be able to be made super fun in VR, right? But Matt, what if I start an awesome VR routine and then it all gets a bit too much and then I get all teary? What then, Matt? What then?
What then indeed? Well, I've just had my son home for the weekend, and so we did play some games, but we were pretty relaxed on the couch while we're playing the games. There wasn't a lot of physical activity except my thumbs, and my thumbs do get sore. Not sure I'd count that as a workout, though. Not sure how high
Was
my
this
heart
Mortal
rate got.
Kombat thumb where you're just like hitting the X button or whatever and you just had
This was a highly technical game where I had to use both thumbs. I had to use my left and my right thumb in some coordinated effort. But having a VR headset that then ties into some other sensors such as heart rate, sweat levels, pupil dilation, just to keep me physically active but not realising it, enjoying it, if I can be so bold to say that, in an exercise routine. So they're called exergames, EXER games, where you're doing exercise, playing a game, so you get tricked. You don't really realise you're doing exercise.
I've been there on one of those machines and you have a whole bunch of fun and then you realise, I'm absolutely wrecked.
That's right, you're sweaty and you've had... So the really cool part about this is I've been working on this where it's monitoring all of these different things and then it changes the gameplay depending on how you're going. So if it detects that you're actually not doing enough, it'll change the gameplay to make it a bit more challenging, so then you start to work a bit harder. If it detects that you're getting a bit bored, for example, well, it might change the gameplay again to get you more interested, more excited. So again, half-hour workout might be just a good little fun bit of half hour of playing, and away you go. And even I remember playing some Wii Sports when that first came out, and I remember tennis, and I worked out in the end I didn't need to be quite so big in my swings of the racket and my forehand and backhand.
You learned how to back off.
Well, I learned that I just had to use my wrist. So I cheated basically. And it came about because I did play, we were playing at one stage there, and I was swinging my Wii device in nice, big, beautiful backhands I was playing. And in a backhand in particular, I collected one of my kids in the back of their head. So I went,
That's on them.
That's getting in my road. Yeah, fair enough too. They didn't seem to think it was their fault at the time, I must remember. But
when they came out of their concussion, yeah, right?
that's right.
Yeah.
3 weeks later, they said, that wasn't my fault, Dad. But I just worked out that it was based on the motion sensor in the controller. So a fast move of my wrist gave exactly the same effect, if you like, as a beautiful swinging backhand.
But it was far less impressive.
Far less impressive, but also much less exercise. So in this scenario, these EXA games, basically it just works out different ways that you're exercising, moving, doing something in the game, and then adjusting things on that. And I do wonder where pupil dilation comes in. I do wonder where even facial expressions come in. I don't know if I am frowning when I'm exercising hard or whether I'm happy. I don't know what my face looks like, but apparently the researchers do, and they'll adjust the gameplay based on my facial expressions and the different things that are happening in my body to make me have a workout. So they've done some trials with a few different ones. One was a VR static bike race. So you're on a static bike and you're putting VR headset on. And so you're in a race. And again, I've seen some of the ones where you ride a Tour de France course, for example, and that looks quite interesting. But in a race, and then you've got things that are happening. And obviously, I would assume that it would start to change how hard it is depending on where you're coming in the race. And you're just in second or third place, so you're working a bit harder, and it's monitoring, you're getting a bit bored now. Okay, you might get in front, or they might put you back further behind. But you know it's a game. You know it's just playing with you. It's not really a race. But I think VR is so good these days that maybe you get engrossed in that, immersed in that.
Yeah, well, that's once you're immersed, all bets are off. Yeah.
One thing that is also happening with VR is that it's not just about fitness, but it's also about a range of things. It's being used for rehab. It's being used for instruction. So, for example, rather than you go down into that dangerous situation and do some training in terms of jumping out of a helicopter or maybe doing some exercises with a fire and rescue mission, they're doing a lot of that training in a VR environment as well to go through that in a much safer environment. There aren't real flames there, so you can do all that in a VR environment and then learn that before you go and do it for real in the real world. So quite incredible where we're going with it. If only they didn't make it look so ugly, James. The big VR headset, look pretty geeky when you're wearing it.
Yeah, they're still a little bit intrusive, aren't they?
They are. Yeah.
One day we'll get the wraparound goggles. So if we're going to colonise space, folks, there are a number of things that are going to have to be considered that may be a big deal here on Earth, but are a really, really big deal when you're 400,000 kilometres from the nearest hospital. When personnel are thin on the ground, everybody is pretty much inexpendable. So NASA is trying to develop a humanoid robot to do all the dangerous stuff in low gravity and zero oxygen environments. Matt, this feels like we're heading into the realm of Star Wars fantasy.
It does. Star Trek, Star Wars, all of that. This is the latest NASA Valkyrie robot, 1.8 metres tall, 120 kilograms, designed for high-risk jobs too dangerous for humans. Uses LiDAR, uses a three-dimensional view of the world, and being tested here in Australia at Woodside Energy over in WA. So it's a humanoid design, but again, just doing various testing just to see if it can get to the point where we're confident with this robot going out and doing things out in the environment. Now, I do like the fact that they're thinking about colonising Mars or sending this to the moon. I still think it's more important, you've heard me say before, to get a robot to pick up the clothes off the floor of the bedrooms of my
One
kids.
thing at a time.
Well, that's
let's
certainly
start with
more
the
important.
clothes.
Yeah, well, that's right. Forget about Mars. Like, who's going to pick up those? I'm sick of picking them up. The kids won't ever pick them up. Even when they come home for a weekend, they leave after a weekend home, and I go, who let off the bomb in here? What happened in this particular room? So it is nice that NASA's doing all this, but I think they need to get that right for a start. One of the things that's interesting is in terms of the design at the moment, it's humanoid, but they think maybe in a zero gravity environment, maybe we don't need legs in quite the same method that we might have legs now. They might need to alter that.
Well, certainly with the power ratios that they would need, they'd need a lot less. It'd be a lot more energy efficient, you'd expect.
You'd think so, because you're not fighting against gravity the whole time.
So potentially less battery, yeah?
Less battery, so they've got to design it with all that in mind. Now, I don't know how they do the testing, because it's hard to do testing in a low gravity environment. You can put a plane up higher and then let it fall, and it's a fairly limited time frame you've got to do that. So it's something that we're getting there slowly, but if we want to see data, commander data from Star Trek, that type of thing, I think we're still 20, 30 years away. But just to get a robot to do some basic things, I think we're getting closer and closer, especially when we look at some of those colonisation concepts. They need to have some of these robots.
But it
around.
also makes a lot of sense. I mean, going into space is a dangerous enterprise anyway, but then to have to force real humans to do quite risky jobs, if you can get a robot to do it, of course.
Yeah, why not?
Makes sense.
Yeah, get cracking.
Oh, look, everybody, it's surprise, surprise time. Now, a recent study on mobile phone usage has found that there is no link to brain cancer. Sorry, I'll read that again. There is still no link between mobile phone usage and brain cancer. But wait, Matt, can we be sure about that for the 2000th time?
No, we can't. And
Right, okay.
This is
It's time for another study.
That's right. This is part of the problem. It's that beautiful classic science quote that says the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. So I can do 5,000 studies or 10,000 studies or 100,000 studies and show there's no link between a mobile phone and brain cancer. But until we see definite evidence that it did happen, we can't say definitely that it won't ever happen.
That's right.
So all
So
we
that's
can rely
why
on,
scientists don't tend to speak in absolutes.
correct. And in this case, because the only way you would prove there was a link is to find a link,
That's right.
it's hard to say there is no link. But all the evidence so far says there has been no link found. And we've had phones around for a while. 3rd of April 1973, Dr. Martin Cooper made the first phone call from a mobile phone, rang one of his competitors, I think Joel Engel was the competitor's name, and said, "Hey, guess where I'm calling you from? Look out your window," or words to that effect. I'm not sure exactly what he said, but that's what I would have said. So, and again, they weren't commonplace in 1973, but they've been around for a long time. That's over 50 years since that first mobile phone call. But we've had a lot of phones in usage for a long period of time, surely more than enough time to work out if there have been some links. So there's a group called ARPANSA, ARPANSA, and that's backed by the World Health Organization. So they've looked at about 5,000 studies conducted from 1994 to 2022. And so at the moment, out of all those studies, they couldn't find any that had any link from brain cancer or any other cancers around our head, throat cancer, any other cancers that might be caused by it. And there's still a bigger risk when we go out in the sun and get burnt from the sun, because we know there are cancers created from that. With phones, though, we're still pretty confident they're safe to use.
And not many people are holding the phone to their ear these days. With excellent microphone and speaker technology, you can hold the phone in front of you and still have a good conversation.
Or have your headsets.
Have the headsets, yeah, all those sorts of things.
And that's using Bluetooth, which is very low power.
Yeah.
It only goes a couple of metres, so it's not trying to get kilometres away to where a tower might be. So we do talk about a lot. Non-ionising radiation, of course, is what electromagnetic waves in this spectrum, in these frequency ranges. And the thing I think that's probably ramped this up again is 5G, because everyone knows that 5G is higher frequency than 4G. So 4G might have been safe, but we know that 5G is going to cause all sorts of problems.
Can we just jump straight to 8G and maybe that'll be
the one.
Yeah, maybe
right.
10G. Or
so
something.
even with 5G, even with testing around those higher levels of or higher frequencies, the radiation is not the type of radiation that's actually going to do any damage. So there are some things, though, where some different things have happened that have got some people a bit stirred up. You may remember that in France, the National Frequency Agency asked Apple to pull sales of the iPhone 12 due to higher radiation levels from that, and then adjust the output from those phones.
That was a couple of years. How many years ago?
It would have been a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So there's one where people said, see, they finally found it. Now, that was a very specific circumstance. There was also an Italian court that sided with a plaintiff claiming that mobile phones caused brain tumours. That, again, was a court case, not necessarily an exhaustive scientific study, but there's been some doubts put forward about that particular one in terms of where was the evidence to show that. So at this stage, yes, mobile phones emit radio waves. Yes, you might be listening to this on a radio station or on a phone that's picked up signals, electromagnetic signals, or you might watch TV tonight. They're all electromagnetic radiation, but all seemingly fairly safe. And actually, that's a good point that I think, as I say it, because I just came up with it. But 1973, first mobile phone call, but we've had radio communication for a lot longer than since 1973.
Bingo.
And even though they're different frequencies and they're transmitting a lot further away than just a few kilometres, people are thinking, well, maybe a mobile phone is different because it's held at your ear. But we've got all these electromagnetic waves bouncing around.
That's right. Yeah, the microwave and radio wave noise around our heads right now is enormous.
People have been using CB radios in trucks for a long time. Farms are out there on their tractors.
TV signals floating through the air. Yeah, they've all got frequencies of these non-ionising radiation bands. And so, and if you are worried, phones are very little difference.
That's right. If you're worried about radiation, just don't go in the sun. That's the most damaging thing we've got in our environment, much more damaging than phones. So at the moment, yes, keep using your phone. Yes, it's all safe as far as we know at this moment in time.
Well, it's time for a little rewind, folks. A little retro action with a flashback to gaming in the 90s. So much of what was happening back then was so experimental. The immersive experience was a little cruder back then, though. Gaming pistols for first-person shooter games, steering wheels for racing, and haptic vests for the rich kids who could afford an extravagance that didn't really work. Matt?
I stumbled across this in a popular science magazine from 1994 in the What's New section. And it was a haptic vest. And it was actually quite clever. I like the concept of it. It was designed to plug into the audio out jack of a video game because there wasn't Bluetooth around to link up to a haptic vest. You plugged into the audio out, and so essentially, I'm imagining here, as you had louder noises in the game, the vest vibrated in tune with those.
And there were little speakers in the vests too. I never had one, but I thought that they had speakers in the vest to bring the noise closer to your ears and stuff.
Correct. And so if you plug into the audio out jack, obviously then you couldn't have audio out, so it would bring the noise to you. So you had this immersive experience, in inverted commas there maybe, that had the vest vibrating. And
very crude.
Yeah, very crude. And I'm assuming that just as it made louder noises, then you got more vibration. Now they spent... This is brought out by a company called Aura Systems, and the vest was the Interactor. So you would interact with the game, presumably. And it was designed particularly for games like Super NES and Sega Genesis systems, but again, any audio out jack would work with. Now, they spent $5 million on a marketing campaign. So we're talking 1994 here, so that's significant dollars back in 1994. The vest itself was $89, so again, fairly expensive. And it just didn't seem to go very well. It was a flop.
Well, it's one of the reasons why nobody's wearing haptic vests these days.
That's exactly right. So it really didn't resonate well. And the problem was that they were really aiming at the young audience, 10, 12, 15-year-olds, and they didn't have this huge amount of money, this $89 at the time, so they didn't really go and buy it, and their parents didn't really see a lot of excitement in a haptic vest, didn't understand what it was. So it really didn't take off. But haptic technology has taken off. We've got haptic technology in a whole range of things, gaming controllers, for example, smartphones. I remember when the first iPhone that came out with a home button that wasn't really a home button, I remember having a discussion with a client one day, and he's talking about the button on his iPhone, and I said, well, it's not actually a button anymore. It's actually a sensor, and then it's got haptic technology underneath it. And he couldn't be convinced. He could not be convinced this wasn't a button. He said, look, you press it, you can feel it go down. I said, that's right. That's haptic technology. No, it's definitely going down. You definitely can feel it going in. I went, well, no, it's not. And the idea of that was to make it easier for Apple to waterproof that phone. If you didn't have a switch like the old one where you had a gap around the outside so that the switch or the button could go in and out, it made it easier to waterproof it. The only way I finally proved from it that it was haptic technology was that I turned the phone off and then said, now press the button, and nothing. There was no depression of the button, no feeling of the button depressing.
And he walked out completely flabbergasted.
No,
it's magic.
He just didn't like being proven wrong. So,
so he bought a new phone.
No, he put it with somewhere else and bought a new phone. So that was fascinating. But that sort of haptic technology is quite good now, and we just become accustomed to it now in a whole range of ways. Even when you've got, I think vibration in general we get used to, even with our cars now, with our steering wheels, they'll sometimes vibrate. If they're going across the lines, if there's a car behind us, we're about to reverse out. So we're getting used to that as a good warning signal for us in general that something, whatever it might be, whether it might be a game, whatever. So good on Aura Systems for having a crack way back in 1994.
having a crack, and it led to other things, didn't it? And
well, I think so.
Maybe just vests wasn't the best place to have your haptic technology.
Maybe not.
We're still on video gaming, folks. Anything you can do, AI can do better. Well, if not right now, give it a couple of months. Gamers, if you feel like you've mastered Super Mario Brothers, your days of glory are numbered, I'm here to tell you. AI is going to put you to shame, and it's only a matter of time. Matt, AI has become really a fun wrecker. A bully boy in the playground. What's the hubbub about Super Mario Brothers?
It is a fun wrecker, and it's actually a bit scary as well. So they did a little test where they said, let's train up this little tool, 737,000 frames from 280 levels of Super Mario Brothers gameplay. And then based on that, sure, you can play the game, but can you go and now create a game? Can you be a programmer? Can you be a game programmer and create a game based on all this other really cool stuff that you've seen there? Now, the training time, all those frames, took about 48 hours, so not that long. Here, go for it, a couple of days. We'll see in a couple of days' time and see how you're going with it. After that, then can you create something? And sure, it could create something pretty basic at this stage, but it could create something better, given a bit more time, a bit more computing power, and learning a bit more about all of this.
So it's less about AI actually beating us in Mario Brothers, Super Mario Brothers, and more about the fact that it's just going to start writing the software, the code for new games.
Well, I can do the first part as well.
Yeah.
So just to prove how clever it is. Yep. Oh, look, I can beat James at that. That's easy. What else can I do? Give me a challenge rather than just being a human. So the next challenge is to go and write that. Now, automated video game generation, fantastic. But could you also start to use this to create virtual environments and simulations? So, for example, if I think of a safety training environment, if you send device down a mine, or look at something where you need to create a training environment, and then say, based on that, now can you go and create a simulated training environment where you can train people using maybe a VR headset, using AI, and then learn about that environment from that. So it's lovely to create games, and there's a huge market there, don't get me wrong. People make a lot of money out of their games, and that's a big market. But what else can we use this for? And what else we can use it for is everything.
Everything.
That's right.
Yeah.
So learn, and we've talked about this one before, learn by watching and then go and do. So to a certain extent, learn by looking at the environment, learn by looking at what people do, and then go and create those simulated environments based on that.
So there is no limit.
There is no limit that we know of at this stage. It's really just a matter of time as they train up more and learn more. And we sit back and go, oh, I didn't know you were doing that bit over there. And that's where it's going to start to head now. So, yes, it might start with Super Mario Brothers today, but it might end with, well, who knows what.
Well, what do you know about coelacanths? They're a deep-sea fish caught off the coast of Madagascar and were unheard of before the 1950s. They're not the prettiest fish in the sea, but they are probably an evolutionary throwback to the transition just before animals moved from water onto land. Their fins project from fleshy limbs, the precursor to legs, folks. They also have pretty nifty and unique scales. And if there's one thing that technology loves to do, it's steal inspiration from nature, Matt.
They do. We very
all
good.
The time.
We look at nature and go, gee, you know what? That seems pretty clever. Why don't we steal that? So the fish scales are a kind of a double helical structure. And based on that, some researchers at Princeton Engineering have found that if they use that same type of structure in concrete, they can boost the crack resistance up to 63%. Now, many times you put concrete down and you'll get a little bit of movement and you'll get some little micro cracks. I remember the house that we're sitting in right now is cement rendered, and my father, who was a builder, said, just leave the bricks because you put cement render on, it'll crack. I went, well, but I like the look of cement render, and so we put cement render on, and sure enough, within a few months, we have a few little micro cracks and you fill them in and paint over it and it's okay. But if you're really worried about that, and if in cement render it's not used for anything that's holding the structure together, it just looks pretty, but if you're using it to hold something together, you probably don't love the idea of lots of cracks until they start to get bigger and a bit more movement. So the whole idea of this is to say, can we make it so that it is tougher and tie these different strands of concrete together, essentially? So they've done this work. They've worked out how to basically take this concept and build it into concrete. And then a couple of other tricks. They accelerated the curing process, so they put some accelerants in there, and that minimised the deformation of these helical structures.
Yeah,
so
right.
just play like concrete. I've played with concrete. I've done stuff with my dad when I was younger, and you just pour concrete out and lay it, and that's it. You just sit back and wait for it to crack. But in this case, they're actually getting the concrete where it's much better. So, for example, if you're building something where you want it into an earthquake area, or maybe somewhere where there's high winds or high possibilities of maybe some deformation occurring, and there's a fine line there. Do you build the structure so that it can flex in these environments, can flex in an earthquake, flex in a high environment, or do you make it so strong that it won't possibly move? And there's a bit of debate about which is the best way to go. But in this particular scenario, they're saying, no, let's just make it so that it's so strong that even those earthquakes, high winds, tornadoes, whatever, they won't have an impact on the actual structure itself.
Yeah, amazing.
So it is quite fascinating. Material science, someone clever told me, material science is the future. But it's not just about what's made up of that material science, it's the way you're structuring that as well.
It's the way it's made.
Yeah, and that's what I find really fascinating. It's not just, we'll mix these things together and that'll come up with some better substance. It's mix these things together, lay it out in this particular way, by using this methodology, and that'll make it better. And that's where it's really fascinating.
Well, it'll be interesting to see just how this catches on in the building industry. If you're in the robot building business, one of the big problems is getting your robot powered up. Every movement has its mechanism, and every mechanism some weight. And with the addition of more weight comes the need to supply further power. Mechatronic engineers have to find new ways to do things, and energy efficiency, well, it's the holy grail of mechatronics. Matt, some clever Swiss engineers have found a new way to power legs, I can see.
We typically think that there's going to be a DC motor, and it's going to be connected to a couple of limbs, if you want to call them that.
That makes sense because that's the way we've done it in the past.
That's right. And why don't we just keep doing it that same old way? One of the things that inspired this concept was hydraulics in terms of normal machinery. When you've got a large bit of industrial equipment, there's often hydraulics involved. So moving fluid from one area to another can be really effective because that fluid isn't compressible, so that can be really effective in moving something. So researchers said, well, why don't we apply that same concept to legs or to limbs that might need to move? So rather than have a DC motor, and a DC motor under load can start to either burn out or be really energy or use a lot of energy. If we're just moving a liquid from one spot to another, maybe that's a better way to move it. So they've done that. They've said, let's make electro-hydraulic actuators and give it a cool name as well. So let's make that. And then let's call them hydraulically amplified self-healing electrostatic actuators, or HASSEL for short, HASEL.
Of course. You get the acronym first and then you try and fit
That's right. That'd be a real hassle, wouldn't it? Oh, there's a good acronym. Let's come up with something like that. That's called a backronym, actually. Make up the acronym first and then create the words to go with it. You think I made that up?
No, I'm getting smarter by the minute.
Right. So when we do all that, they've actually found, when I say we, I'm using the rural we there. I didn't do anything with it. I'm just researching it. But they found that the amount of energy used to move a leg or an arm was 1.2% of the energy required compared to DC motors. So not a 1.2% saving, 1.2% of the energy used. And then it came with an extra bonus.
Wow.
DC motors can actually warm up. So they can basically get to the stage where there's heat being generated. If you're generating heat, that's wasting energy because you don't need the heat. It's just a byproduct. They found that some DC motors on legs were getting to about 38 degrees Celsius. Maybe they thought they were human, I'm not sure, but they were getting about that sort of temperature.
Coincidence? No. Yeah.
Maybe not. But HASSEL legs didn't actually heat up at all. So they were just moving a fluid from one area to another. So take those big industrial machines, take those hydraulics, shrink that down into something and then make it work. So that's been very effective.
Yeah, so DC motors are also heavy.
Yeah.
And so, you've got to kind of get rid of them.
And you kind of go, well, that's pretty obvious, isn't it? We've had hydraulics forever. Why didn't someone think of that yesterday? And this is the beauty of when you see something great in terms of innovation or a sort of experiment.
Retrospective thinking.
Oh,
yeah.
That was easy. That was obvious. Anyone could have thought of that, but not anyone did. These researchers did. So it sounds quite fascinating. I did think about the extra weight because you've got a fluid, but when you think about it, there's not a lot of fluid that you're going to need. It's not like a huge oil reservoir you're going to need. You don't need a lot of fluid to move that from one part to another to move a leg. I actually don't understand totally the structure of it, how they've got the structure and where they've got that set up. But again, I can't imagine there's a lot of fluid that's needed for that, so it's not a lot of extra weight.
Well, it'll be interesting to see when it becomes more common, and we can, and more people can see and tease it apart and have a look at it.
Yeah.
Just how that all does come together.
Well, they did say, the researcher said that definitely there's no reason why you couldn't use this for a bipedal robot, so someone that looks like they're like us, you and I, walking with legs. And then you get to the stage where maybe someone that doesn't have a leg or has lost an arm, could that be
prosthetics,
used? Could that be used for that environment as well? So it's not a big DC motor with a big battery somewhere attached to you. Having 1.2% of that energy required, surely that's going to make it much better. So quite fascinating.
Holograms. They've been promising to make an impact on society since Star Wars was released in the cinemas in the mid to late 70s. But they haven't quite cracked it into the realm of practicality yet. I mean, we saw lots of them through the 80s and the 90s, but they never really did anything. That is until now that car manufacturing giant Ford has filed a patent recently. Matt, it's now in the hands of the marketers to see if holograms will sell cars. What's going on here?
And you're right, R2-D2, Princess Leia, there's a hologram there. If it happened in the mid-70s, surely we've nailed it by now.
Everyone went, wow, that'd be cool if you could do that.
That's right.
And then, holograms sort of appeared on, we had some things on a paper or whatever, you could see holograms, and it was a novelty that you could buy in stores. But,
but it hasn't really taken off. So Ford has filed a patent. And what they're saying in their patent, or what they've submitted in their technology, is the idea for interactive holograms to be used firstly outside the vehicle. So someone approaches the vehicle and next thing you know, they're seeing a guard dog and they go, oh, I won't go near that car because it's got a guard dog. Or a police officer hanging around. Well, I'll go and break into someone else's car because that car seems to have a police officer looking a bit strange and a bit misty, but looking like he's hanging around that car. And I thought about that and I thought, just based on R2-D2 as the best experience of a hologram, but surely someone's not going to fall for a holographic police officer standing beside a car. You look at it and you go, that's not really a police officer. And they could make it move, they could make it interact, they make it talk to you, but it's just not going to look like the real thing, surely.
Unless it looks like RoboCop.
That's right, maybe then. But anyway, this is where they're headed. So they're talking about outside the car, guard dogs, police officers, but maybe that's a bit obvious, maybe just having the owner walk around there, some sort of hologram, someone that looks like an owner, because you're probably not going to have someone break into your car while you're just hanging around the car. So various things. But then they also think they can use holograms inside the car. And I'm just trying to think, when do I want a hologram inside my car? I've got a nice screen in the car. I can use that. But
a slightly aggressive Rottweiler in the backseat of your car, that could be.
Maybe, but while I'm driving, that might scare me. So they're talking about using it for your entertainment system, using it to make things easier. I just don't know where they're yet. And sometimes you get so many distractions in the car, you forget to drive, you forget to actually do what you're meant to be doing, concentrating on the road ahead. But there's been some other technologies I've seen that didn't really take off. One from a different manufacturer was an in-car urinal, because you don't want to stop on those long trips. You just want to keep going. That one didn't really take off for some reason.
I haven't seen that in
And it's probably safer to stop just for whatever reason you want to stop for, but stop maybe at a toilet rather than just keep driving. I'm going to keep driving through the night and I've got the in-car urinal to save me that extra minute of stopping, or 2 minutes maybe. So
I'm just thinking about the fumbling around that's got to occur to that, and talking about distractions and not causing accidents.
That's right,
If you're going to be...
I hadn't thought about that, but it's kind of, it's at the wrong angle. And the other one, Tesla had a patent for a laser windshield wiper. Now, I remember when I was a kid and I used to kind of draw little things that I'd make up in the back of the car driving along. And I did actually come up with this thing one day, which I've never seen. I've never talked about it before. So this might be a huge innovation here.
So this is either going to be awesome or really embarrassing in the end. But anyway,
maybe
go for
both.
it.
And I thought when rain's hitting the windscreen, it seems so clumsy to have a big piece of rubber just wipe across it, across the screen, and that's it. Is that the best you've got? So I thought, why don't they have a little blower at the bottom of the windscreen that when it's raining, the blower turns on and it creates a little air package across the top of the windscreen, and then the rain doesn't actually hit the windscreen, it hits the air and then bounces off.
Yeah,
I have no idea about the physics of that, whether it was possible or not, but surely it just seems like such a clumsy thing. We've come so far in other areas, but the windscreen wiper, and I flew on a Dash 8 Q400 the other day, and as we were going out to it, I looked up and I'd forgotten about windscreen wipers on planes. It just seems so basic, doesn't it? You got a little windscreen wiper, you got this plane, you try and make it as aerodynamic as possible, and you got this windscreen wiper on and like, how much does that do when you're flying along at 700 kilometres an hour? And so I don't know if that works anywhere. Someone can have it if they want. Just say good day to me as part of the process of the patent. But they Tesla had a laser windshield wiper, where it might have been the same sort of thing, where they were using a laser across the windscreen to try and keep the water off it. Maybe the only advantage I thought of later about the for the rubber wiper is you get bugs on the windscreen, and that's a way to get a nice clean windscreen, is to drive in the rain and have your windscreen wiper going. Maybe the air could be used for that as well, I'm not sure, or the laser. So there's been other things that haven't worked so well. I'm not convinced that a hologram would really deter someone from breaking into my car.
You remain sceptical.
I do, just a touch. And it'd be good fun to show your friends, a bit like when you do the
We'll
Tesla
know how
dance.
successful it is by how many people are driving around with these hologram cars.
Yeah, and can you do it while you're driving? So you drive along and go, hold on,
Why is
there's
there a
Robocop
policeman running
this.
alongside?
That's right. You're like a presidential car where you've got someone touching the four corners of
Yes,
the car while
that would be
run along
cool.
beside it. Yeah, maybe that's not such a bad idea after all. So.
And that's all we have for you today, folks. Strangely, two shepherd's crooks have appeared from laterally off stage and sending a very vaudevillian hint that it's time for us to go. Thanks for another cracking Tech Talk, Matt.
I am going out to just turn off all my smart speakers. Well, actually, no, I'm not planning on committing a crime in my place, so maybe I should leave them all on. So, yeah, no, I'm leaving them on now.
Turning off the smart speakers on other people's houses.
That's right, yes, for those ones I'm going to
Sorry, I'm
break
breaking
into.
in just to turn them off. Oh, well, I'm off to see if VR goggles can detect how I'm feeling about the GWS Giants not making the grand final this year while I tear the stuffing out of a heavy bag. Thanks for tuning in again, folks. Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson is a podcast inspired by the collective creativity of a species that is always seeking a better way. Well done, humans. Keep on keeping on. I've been your host, James Eddy, and I look forward to our next opportunity to meet up, which, all things being equal, should be in 1 week's time. Matthew, has been gracious in including me. I'm passing the favour on to you, so why don't you pay it forward and bring a friend along next week? There's plenty for everyone. See you next week.